Thanks very much, Jesper. Appreciate that. I love this analogy of the tug of war. It's I've definitely felt it myself. Lots to unpack there. So now it's a chance to dive in with into what great leadership actually is with our panel. Pia, Henriette, Jesper, all here. Jesper, you mentioned about leaders having to engage or look at how they're going to engage more. I guess there's a traditional image, probably a very old, stuffy image of how leaders are somehow detached from the day-to-day workings of life, and you know they're making tough decisions on behalf of the workplace themselves. But actually, leaders are people as well. We've seen that in the pandemic more than ever. You know, we've kind of had these layers stripped bare, so they appear in all walks of life, in different ways, different paths as well. I'm really interested to kick off a nice discussion. Pia, you're closest to me, so I'm going to go with you. What are the qualities that make for a good leader?
Yeah, with unfortunately 25, 30 years of experience, I must say, there are some things that stick to me still, which is super important. And it's small things like how do you secure an environment where people feel that they are being seen. So how am I being seen? And create a trust environment and transparency. So communicate clearly and really be close to the values and yourself, and authentically just share vulnerability as well and things like that. So the more human you can be, I have learned, the stronger you are as a leader. And I think many times it's perceived as weakness, but for me it's really the opposite. And also I lead an agile team, which is where we have 3-week sprints we work in, and I'm actually only setting the goals for these 3 weeks. And then I just leave the team. I have nothing to do with it anymore. Then I see them demo after 3 weeks, the fantastic work they have done, and so happy showing me what they have done, and also other stakeholders, by the way. And then another 3 weeks. So I only set the goals and the priorities, and then they're self-managing. And what I have learned from more traditional leadership, where I think still trust, communication, and all that is still important also now, but that is that people actually, when you trust them, they give you so much back. And then they really put themselves in front, and then they, between them, find a way. Who's best for this? Who has energy in this? Who is up for it for this period? Who would like to learn something now? And then it suddenly become an organic thing. I have never ever led a team like I do now that have had so much output and quality by actually putting myself a little behind, but putting some rules up and some clear communication and so on. But it's amazing. So what I'm trying to say is that we have so many resources as humans. And if you can unleash that, I think then you have the quality in your leadership.
I can see Henriette nodding away. So do you agree? Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, I think there's so many good points in what you're saying, Pia, so I definitely agree. I think if I was to, I think definitely the way that you're describing freedom and the ability to act, that's what you need to create as a leader. If I was to sort of say it off the tongue, I would say, as a leader, I think you need to create the ability of an organization to create results and work with relationships. That's the two main focuses of leaders. But I'm more humble around saying what is good and what is bad, because I think it's extremely context driven. And I mostly collaborate with leaders who are in their 50s and they've been successful forever. So I'm not trying to basically change what they're doing, because they are all imperfect and doing it in exactly their way. But what I'm trying to teach them is how to become aware of what they're doing. So basically, I think when you describe your way of leading, Pia, I think what's the quality around you is that you have a self-awareness on a high level. I think that's the difference. So you can be a leader in many different shapes and forms, just like you said, Phil, but the self-awareness piece is actually the most important element. You have to be, I normally popularly say, you have to be a little bit schizophrenic as a leader. You have to act, and while you're acting, you have to sort of be able to stand next to yourself and look at what you're doing. And that's actually becoming increasingly important as I see it, because the difference with the millennials, as you started out, Phil, is that I think I also feel it as a parent, actually. there's an increase in the request from young people on, especially people with more authority, having this self-insight and the self-awareness and the self-irony and being able to sort of, you know, put yourself a little bit in parentheses and not be so, you know, authoritarian, classically authoritarian. So that's happening right now. That's what I see the most. So results and relationships, and then the self-awareness, that's what I would go for.
It sounds exhausting in a way, to be a leader, like to work on this schizophrenic level, as you call it.
No, you could also say it's more relaxing, Phil, because it gives you the right to step next to yourself and say, that didn't come out right, help me here. Because I think another important shift that's going on right now, so I've been working with leadership for more than 20 years, most of the time as an advisor, but also as a leader. And I would say one of the shifts going on right now is during the 20 years, I think we've over-focused on the individual. Leadership is a relationship, right? So I think we should focus on the relationship rather than the individual. And that actually gives you a little bit more, as a leader, you don't have to be as perfect anymore, right? Because it's in the relationship. We have to, there's a two-way street in leading, right? And the good thing is, most of us have really, really good colleagues, really good people that we are leading. So it's not that hard.
No, it's a very good point. It's about relations instead of individuals. That was actually a good way of saying it, because that's exactly also what I experience, and that collectively you do more, or at least you have the opportunity to create more than individually. So that we know. So I think that was actually a quite good way of saying it. So that's what happens. So the dynamics between people somehow influence how things will turn out instead of being individuals. So that was just a very good.
Could you actually argue then that and I fully agree with that, by the way, that relationship and relationship building is so important for a leader, that time is kind of like the currency of relationship as well. I mean, that's all the way also from the Little Prince and the story about it. Time is really essence here. Could you argue then that, at least from where I sit, not only private companies but also actually public companies are making more and more, especially organizational changes, at a quicker and quicker pace, where you have to relate to new people all the time? Could you say that's almost like an enemy for the relationship building? And could that actually be something that we should worry about? My own answer would be yes. I think there is too much change because where you kind of it's an easy change to change the organization. It always looks good on paper, by the way. You can always argue why it's a good idea, right? So and I just worry that with the relationship building and that being so important, which I fully also believe in and support. So maybe that's for later, but I do think that there's something about the organization and building that can be tricky if there are constant changes.
I totally agree, Jesper. And I think it's, if you are the kind of, I mostly work with the executive suite, right? So if you are the type of executive who needs to use organizational change, an organizational structure change as your only, tool for changing the organization, then you are not a very competent manager, right? I mean, we all know that the organizations are basically, global networks of people who want to be connected, who actually belong to the family of Lego, right? That's how we all identify, and that's why I think that we should really respect relationships. And actually, in your opening, Jesper, my worry, my most sort of, fierce worry right now is actually not the team in itself, because I think during COVID we've had all these weird conversations from our bedrooms and with the dogs and the kids and all this stuff. I'm worrying about the social relationships between the teams, all the cross-organizational stuff, all the flirting at the Christmas party and all the relationships, because at the end of the day, organizations are human, organisms where we are all connected. And social obligation is basically the only obligation that makes you stand up at 4:30 and do the last part of the presentation or whatever you do, right? You're obligated towards somebody. And that's my worry. How do we make sure that on the days where you're at the office, you can actually talk to those other guys from the other teams and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Because that's hard.
No, you're right, and I think online meetings in particular is they're very purpose driven, right? So you go into this meeting with a particular purpose, and I actually realized after a few months last year that I probably had expected my team to actually mingle around in the meeting, so they would create their own hangout meetings on Friday afternoon or whatever. That happened for a few, but it actually didn't happen for most of them. So I actually had to take the facilitator role, and I had to organize it, which would never happen in the real world. So again, I think that's something to be aware of, that not everybody will just normally, reach out to people and create those different relationships online.
Definitely not. And I think we're talking about the wrong things, right? If we were in a physical workplace, we would talk much more about each other, right? We would say, good to see you, Phil. Oh, I haven't seen you forever, Pia. How's your mom doing? And that the whole personal layer of conversation is just not there right now. And I would argue that, so I've had a few teams that have actually, just like you, Jesper, organized, Thursday evening, informal drinks and then they've actually, they've sent out questions like, what was the most awkward or embarrassing thing you did when you were a teenager? What was the blah blah? Personal questions that are okay to answer, but are really goddamn awkward, right? Where you get to know each other, and that has worked. But you have to structure it. It's not like when you sit over lunch and you actually ask those weird questions. So those informal conversations that build relationships.
We have done a lot of these things. We have gaming on Fridays, we have check-ins on Tuesdays, and so we do a lot. And I think we have actually, I'm super proud of what has happened from that. And we all feel in the team that we are closer, as you also say. So we are actually much closer than in the real world, you can say. That is a little interesting, right? But then the question is, as what you're onto, I think, or you as well, the concern about stakeholders or the rest of the organization. So we have become even closer, and I'm super afraid to come back to your ears, but that we are then this little united when we are
creating us and them culture, right?
And so how do you suddenly engage with the rest of your colleagues that are super important for the big results at the end? Because we cannot keep on doing that, but we have actually turned into that. So it is a little, it's a new. It's a new things we have never thought about before.
And there's something about being out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore, if you, how would you meet someone who you hadn't thought about because you hadn't seen him or her? So, but you randomly dump into that person in the office, someone from a different department, right? And then that happens. That just doesn't happen online.
No.
And so there's something interesting there.
Just very quickly before we go to Anne Hyatt, I'd love to know, it sounds like the style of your leadership is constantly evolving, and you're discovering stuff now that wasn't in place then, and if we hadn't had the pandemic, you'd have discovered something else. How do you keep up with that evolution?
I'm not so sure. It's I partly agree and partly disagree with the assumption. A lot of the things that we need now, we also need that 20 years ago. Some of the things are just being accentuated now,
exactly.
Right? So the level of how you make sure that you show even clearer that you trust people, right? Make it do even more of the you could say the non-planned interactions with your people. Make sure that everybody is included and engaged in a meeting, right? Everybody is now much more, especially in online meetings, much more, at the same level. No matter who you are, if the CEO, or you'll still be a picture on the screen. So I think and that we should also strive for in the real world, to include everybody, the inclusion in the meetings. So nothing has changed in that respect. It's just being much more clearer now what needs to happen. So I actually do think it's to a large extent it's the same principles, and it goes back to what you said. I mean, I think it worked 25 years ago. It still works. It's just a different setting, and I think the real challenge is making it work in a different setting. So how do you create relations online? But it's still about creating relations, as an example. So I actually do think that's
Yeah, now the big question: how do we then come back in normal? I mean, we have.
And we don't, right?
No, we don't. We don't. No one wants to be normal. No, exactly. So for instance, we have learned that nature should be part of the future, because that's one of the things we have learned, that we have much better meetings when we walk.
When we're outdoors.
When we're outdoors, when you're free, you only have people in your head and no notifications. You're just present. You are with your colleague or your manager or whoever. So how can that be brought in? So it's super interesting that that transition will be as awkward as it. I mean,
True. Yeah.
we have to unlearn again and then learn something new.
No, definitely.
It's
Just imagine
super
you suggested
interesting
that.
and super. So to your question, yeah, it's exhausting in that sense. It keeps on evolving, and then but we adapt, and it's just I don't think it's.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to pause our thoughts there for the moment.